Hello. Tonight we're going to talk about how to build a tic-tac-toe game in Articulate Storyline. The game to play seems quite simple. To replicate it, however, in Storyline can be a little bit more complex. And I'm using question banks to decide whether or not, the user or the computer wins this square. So I guess that also adds to the complexity. I'm sure there's easier ways than that. But let's do it the hard way because we'll learn a few things. All right. If you'd like to play along, I've got practice files and resources at tinyurl.com/tic-tac-toe-storyline. I got my PowerPoint in there. I've got a fully built tic-tac-toe for learning project. I got a partially built project, and everything is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution 4.0. So you're welcome to reuse materials or redistribute them. Just give me credit. All right, so let's take a look at what we are building today. Let's see. I'm going to stop my share and reshare. Where is it? Here we go. Okay, so this is my demo version of tic-tac-toe. I was trying to teach how to do APA formatting. If you are in college, you're very familiar with it. If you've been out of college for a while, you're probably like, what is that? Just a way of formatting academic papers when you are a college or a graduate student. And it's tedious to learn APA. There's a lot of details involved. So I created a larger tutorial in APA, and I put several games in that tutorial, including this tic-tac-toe game. So just like real life tic-tac-toe, it's X's and O's. You want to get green X's as the user. You have to answer 3 questions about APA correctly to get the green X. If you answer any of them incorrectly, the box goes to your opponent, which is the computer. You get 3 in a row to win. 3 O's in a row mean you lose. And I also put in a light box APA guide. It's not super elegant. The original version, I did a custom built APA guide, and it's good enough for now. All right, so here's the game itself. This is the game board. You can see it opens up with blank squares. Again, I've got the light box APA guide here. You can always jump back to the rules. I've also got a reset built in. It's a little more complicated than it needs to be, but I was feeling pretty fancy when I built this. I'll show you how this works. So say you want the center square. It jumps into a set of 3 questions. At any time, you can reference the APA guide to help you answer, because I figure in real life, you don't necessarily need to memorize APA. You just kind of need to know how to find that information. So you're kind of practicing that skill. So I'll go ahead and just, answer these real quick. It tells you if it's correct or incorrect for each question. And that's the 3rd question there. I got all 3 correct. You got it. There's a little cheering sound. Yay, got a green X, and that appears in the middle there. For each of the other squares, it's the same deal. You have to answer 3 questions. So all in all, there's 9 question banks. Is 1 tied to each square. Each question bank has 3 questions for a total of 27 questions altogether. That doesn't mean that I wrote 27 questions from scratch. There's a lot of tweaking, changing the format, changing some of the authors, things like that. Let's jump through this and see if I can get this false true. Incorrect. Oh no, I answered 1 incorrectly. There's a red circle for the computer. You can see that appears there. I won't belabor this. If you go through the whole thing, if you get 3 X's in a row, any which way, you win. If the computer gets 3 red O's in a row, any which way, you lose the game. So it's just a way to try to learn APA reference page formatting in a little bit more light-hearted way that feels a little bit less tedious, hopefully. So I'll go ahead and stop that share. And then reshare. Okay, so that's the demo. There, of course, is a link to that in my Dropbox folder, in that link I shared at the beginning of this webinar. So, I mean, I'm interested in making this a learning experience, not just tic-tac-toe for the fun of tic-tac-toe. There's other ways to do that. Now, of course, I'm thinking about how would I make a really simple tic-tac-toe game? Maybe I should have done this for this webinar. I made this thing really complicated. But, I'm really interested, of course, in learning experiences, not just creating really simple games. I want them to be used for learning purposes. This is how I created tic-tac-toe for learning. So the idea, again, is to teach how to format a reference list using APA formatting. And this game falls under Bloom's taxonomy in the remembering and understanding level. So if you remember the Bloom's taxonomy period, it's going to be down here at the bottom of the pyramid, remembering and understanding. So remembering where to find information on APA formatting and understanding it. And I guess not quite applying it, because you're just like recalling and you're just understanding it. You're not really applying it in this game. As I said, this game is part of a larger tutorial where I did have opportunities to actually apply. And there's opportunities like these games to just kind of get the basics, and then you can apply those basics in other activities. All right. What's important as I build this out, and I'll go through this in my demo, is to have a naming convention in place for each of your squares. So if tic-tac-toe is going to be a 3x3 grid, each square should have a name for it. I want really simple A1, A2, A3, A1, B1, C1 for the column. Each square is going to have its own variable and its own question bank. And it's important to keep yourself really organized. So I recommend deciding on some sort of naming convention in advance, putting that off to the side, maybe drawing yourself a map. I always encourage mapping things out in advance and coming up with flow charts, because it'll save you so much development time, because you'll save so much time not being confused. All right, so let's go ahead and end this slideshow. I'm going to pull up the resources for you. Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to reshare my screen here. Okay, so what? All right. So you can see my entire screen. It is a white screen. So in the PowerPoint, I gave you a link to tinyurl.com/tic-tac-toe-storyline. That brings you to this Dropbox folder. Right now, I'm going to show you the step-by-step guide. I have this typed up for you. This isn't a perfect guide. I had to kind of recreate what I did when I originally created the game. It's going to get you hopefully to where you need to be. It is complicated to build. It is about 2 pages of instructions here, but let's start working through it. All right, so first thing I'm gonna do is I opened up my original version of this. So I actually built this tic-tac-toe game 6 years ago, 7 years ago, and I went back and I looked at it and I was like, wow. You ever build something and you go back and look at it and you kind of impress yourself and you're like, I don't know if my current self could actually build this out. In any case, this is the main game board slide. You can see how many slide triggers I have on the right here. And of course, you don't build those all at once. There's a lot of copying and pasting, a lot of duplicating. But you see here, it's really important that you name your shapes. So each of the shapes you can see in the timeline below, each one is named. And then when you click on it, you can see it's got respective triggers over here that are assigned when you click on them. And there's also triggers up here that are just slide triggers where things will happen depending on what the results were of the user trying out the quiz for each of these boxes. I've got some other things here on screen. These were variables I use for testing. I always recommend if you have a lot of variables, you can make sure they're changing the way you expect them to change by putting them on screen for your testing. And then anything you move off screen, your user can't see when you publish. So this is published. This is the published version. I also labeled my boxes here by putting these labels to the left and to the right. So, A1, A2, A3. You see the numbers down here. And that was my reminder of how I had each of these things labeled, just to make sure I was keeping myself really straight. Because there's nothing worse, you build something entirely out and you're like, oh, I goofed. I did this wrong thing for every single square. That's no fun, so don't do that. All right. So as I mentioned, this is pretty complicated, but you can see how I had this built out. This is the main game board right here. And there's 9 question banks. Each square goes to its own question bank and has basically a blank results slide that just redirects the user back to the game board ultimately and changes the state of that slide, the box on the slide. So, you know, the tic-tac-toe game actually happens. All right. This version is very complicated. This is the fully built original version.story. It's got a lot going on. If you are new to like variables and triggers, probably don't even look at that. It would be easier to look at the partially built version, which I have here. And what I'm going to do right now is actually open up a new project altogether so I can work with you through the step-by-step guide I have here. Okay, so I'm going to put the kind of guide off to my left here. So the first step, I just want to say, have a strategy in place for doing a save as and saving your project to the cloud periodically. Lately, I've been using Dropbox to store my storyline files. In the past, opening things directly from Dropbox and editing them has caused problems with Dropbox. So it's often better to save a copy locally of your storyline project and just periodically put it into the cloud or put a copy into the cloud to make sure that it's nice and safe. I do a save as periodically at least once a day if I'm working on a big project like this, but every hour or two might be even better because you make a lot of changes as you go through, and sometimes you're like, oh, I changed the color of all of these things and I wish I hadn't done that. And you can go back and you can maybe save that or copy and paste that object into your current version. So do a lot of save as. I come up with a name for the file, and then usually I'll append the date. And if I'm saving every hour, it might be like, oh, this is like, you know, the 1300 version, you know, for 1 p.m. For this date, so that I have a very clear idea of when and where each version is from. All right, so that's my high horse for please save as, use the cloud. Let's dive into the actual instructions here. I put first step, write 27 quiz questions. I mean, think about what your learning objectives are, of course. This is meant to be a learning experience. Write a handful of quiz questions for each of your learning objectives, and then you can just use those as templates, tweak to reuse. I also included a resource here for writing test questions. It's a little bit more to it than you probably think. There's a lot of really bad test questions out there, so please give that a look. Gather your files as needed. But let's jump to number 3. So open up a new storyline file. Let's do a save or a save as. I've got too many projects. I have so many projects. Let's do tic-tac-toe live. That's gonna be the name of my file here. All right, so just a standard storyline project. It's nothing fancy. Let me go ahead and get some things off my screen here. All right, so I'm gonna enlarge this. Let's go into the one box that's on screen. I'm going to rename the slide to, let's call it game board. This is the game board. First thing I'm going to do is create a single square. So we are a ways away from building out all 9 squares. We're going to start by keeping it simple by building out 1 square. Once you have that 1 square built, you can test it, make sure it works the way you expect, and then you can duplicate that square along with all the other things that are attached to it and just tweak them to make your other 8 squares. But we're just gonna do 1 square for basically most of this webinar. So let's do it. I'm gonna insert my square here. I'm gonna go to format, and you know, I'm feeling pretty fussy here, so I'm gonna make sure it's a perfect square. Hate the color, so I'm going to change it to white, like white and white, no outline. And then I'm going to change the background to, I don't know, just kind of like light gray, just so it kind of pops off of that. Oh, that's terrible. That's too dark. I hate it. I'm going to make that a little bit lighter, just so it's kind of subtle. Okay. Let's see. The other thing I noticed is this is not widescreen. I really prefer widescreen. So I'm going to change that right now to 16:9. Oops. Let's do that one more time. Change the shape of my box. That upsets me. I don't know if the background. Okay. Okay, so I mean, do that now because there's nothing worse when you change the size later on, and it makes all your objects tweaky. Just to make sure this is like the square is the right size. Yeah. It's a little bit too big. I'm going to change this to, I don't know, let's call it 125, 125. Okay, So I just want to check the size of that square and make sure I'm happy with it. Happy, happy, good, good. Okay. Delete, delete. All right. Oops. Not why I'm changing the size. Okay, so there's my square. You know, let's make this more visible just by putting an outline around it. Okay, there we go. You know, I should have kept open that other partially built because I don't want to belabor adding states here. We do have limited time together. So I'm opening up my partially built project here so I can steal things from it. Okay, so I'm gonna copy this. So this already has the states built out. So there's a normal state, correct state, incorrect state. I'll put this here. Even make that the same size. Oops. Okay. So I'm gonna, let's just use the format pane. Format. All right, painted that format. Ah, right. Now it does not have the proper states. The states are weird. Oh, I changed the size of this square and now it's funky. That's okay. All right, make sure you're happy with your square size to begin with. All right, so this is my copy and pasted slide. These are the states. So of course, blank is the normal state because you're like playing the game. The square should be blank when you start tic-tac-toe. There's the correct state. So you got all 3 questions correct as the user. You get the square, you get the green X. If you answer one of those questions wrong, there's going to be a red O that appears, which means the computer gets the square. And there's just kind of a built-in selected state there as well. All right. So I'm going to delete the other triggers. I'm going to go to the timeline and make sure this is named correctly. I'm going to call this square A1. Why don't I just name it A1? Hey, I could say A1. Okay. So this is square A1, okay? So remember I showed you my diagram here of the squares and how I labeled them. This is in the step-by-step guide. That's my diagram here. This is gonna be A1, it's gonna be in the top left. I mean, name it whatever square you want, but for now I'm naming it A1 and all the instructions are built to kind of follow that. So it's gonna be A1 and I'm gonna add a variable called A1. I'm just gonna leave it as a text variable and the default value is going to be a blank. Okay, that's done. All right, so name the square. I added a variable called A1. That's good so far. Each square is going to have its own variable. Okay, so I paused the recording there for a moment to get a participant caught up. All right, so I've created my square. I named it. I created a corresponding variable A1. We are now going to move on to building a question bank that contains at least 1 question. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to the story view, which is where it's easiest to find your question banks and manage them. And as I mentioned, ultimately, we're going to have 9 question banks total. There's going to be 1 for each square. I'm just building out 1 square. I'm just building out 1 question bank now so you can see how it all works. We can do copying and pasting later on. New storyline project automatically has question bank 1 added here. I'm going to manage question banks. I'm going to take that question bank 1. Oops. Told myself I wasn't going to do that and I did it. I want to change the name of it. They make it a little bit tricky to figure out which box to click to change the name. I'm going to call this question bank A1. So again, I'm making sure to be really fastidious about naming everything. I named my object. I named the corresponding variable to match the object. I'm naming the question bank to match the square as well. So it's really clear how everything is connected. There's things in Storyline they can't quite control as far as naming goes. We'll talk about that more in just a moment. But where you can control it, name things so that they all match you. Your life is a little bit easier. All right, so now if you click on question banks, you see question bank A1. We can add your first graded question here. I'm going to do a really simple true-false question. In your question banks, as you build out your questions later on, you can use whatever questions you want. For testing purposes and for building this out right now, I'm not going to use a real question. I'm just going to say the correct answer is true and leave true selected there. That's it. I'm building out 1 question. This is it. I'm done. This is all just for testing so that, you know, later on it's easier to add questions, but when you're testing it, it's easiest if you just have 1 question. So as you're testing, you don't have to go through all of them. Okay, so that's done. I added one question. This question bank is going to be used to determine if the user or the computer wins the square. Later on, of course, as you add your real questions, vary the number depending on how hard you want it to be for the user to win the square. My original project is all about learning APA formatting. I had 3 questions for each square. And as I mentioned, there was a lot of like, I wrote 27 questions all together, but they're all like kind of tweaked versions of maybe a handful of questions. So think about what your learning objectives are, what you're really trying to reinforce. And it's totally okay and it makes sense that you are having some repetitive content as the user moves through. So just consider that from the instruction design standpoint. All right, here we go.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes, please.
So you labeled it the A1 question bank. So that means only when the user clicks that box to do the X, those questions will be asked.
Yes.
Like you won't find those questions unless you program them into like A2 or A3.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
And later on, you can copy and paste question banks and things too. Just
Okay. Thank you.
Right now, we're doing the one. It's going to make our lives easier to just start building this out and then copy and paste them later on. All right. So next up, we are going to create a slide that has the question bank on it. Building the question bank is just step 1. You have to actually put it somewhere so the user can use it. So I'm going to I always space out on this. Here it is. All right, so it's not under new slide, it's under question bank. So under question banks on the store view, select new draw from question bank. I only have the one question bank. You'll see by default, it'll draw questions randomly, which is kind of fun from a game experience, game experience standpoint. The question's gonna be random each time the user plays. If a user were to replay the same square in a different game or something, it would be a slightly different experience. You can choose how many questions to include. If you wanted to put 10 questions in each question bank, but then only include 3, it's gonna be a very different experience every time the user plays, and that adds more replayability to the game. So I'm going to include it's only one question. I'm just going to go ahead and insert that. So there's that. And I'm going to create a new scene. I'm going to call this the A1 scene. And I'm going to drag this over, delete that untitled slide there. And I didn't rename this original scene. So game, I'm going to name this a game board scene. Let's call it the game scene. I can call this a main scene, whatever you want. All right. So I got my question bank A1, I've got my A1 scene. Next, I'm going to add in a results slide into that same scene. I'm going to add a blank result slide. And let's see, so we need to add that to the scene directly. So it's going to calculate results of questions, and it's going to be from question bank A1. Passing score is going to be 100%. And I'm gonna click OK. All right, then I'm going to delete the stuff here on the slide. I'm going to go back to story view, and I want that to go into here. So that's going to be in slide A or scene A1. So the question bank A1 is going to shoot the questions out. Then the user is going to go to the results slide. Where are we on the? All right, so we're still working on connecting the question bank to our test square. So in the same scene, I inserted the blank results slide for the respective question bank A1. I delete the stuff on the slide. On the base layer, I'm going to add a trigger that sets A1 or your respective square name variable to complete. So let's open that up again. So that's submitting, that's fine. Leave the default stuff as it is, except for the next and back buttons. We'll tweak those later on according to your own preferences. I'm going to adjust variable A1 to value. What's it going to do? I'm going to do complete. Now I'm thinking if I set up these question or this step-by-step guide correctly. Okay. Yes, I'm going to name this to complete when the timeline starts on this slide. If the, let me make sure I got this correct. Okay. It's one of those things where I'm like, this project is so complicated. I want to make sure I'm setting it up correctly. Base layer, turn the game board. Okay, we'll come back and change this later on if I screwed this up. All right, so just variable. Go ahead.
I think it's number 5, right? So 6 and then AE and then number 5 on the base. No, number 6.
Here, yeah, no, I'm thinking I'm thinking about something else. I'm thinking about
okay.
if I'm setting up this variable correctly, or if I'm totally off base.
Okay.
We'll do that. All right, so 2 slide layers, one for success and one for failure. You can customize your messages on these. I can't remember what I had on here. It's just like, you know, you got it or you didn't get it. You got it. Yay. You can make that centered. You know, you want some sort of message for your user. It's also an opportunity for making sure the triggers you need to process are processing. Not quite. Okay, so then what happened? And then on the results slide base layer, I'm going to insert a button that allows them to, I can't remember what message to put, return to board. Or I think just continue. Let's just do continue. Whatever you want to put here, whatever message you want to put here, it doesn't really matter. But this is going to take them back to the game board itself. So let's see. That's going to be jump to slide game board when user clicks button 1, and make sure that this is set so that the these slide layers don't hide what's on the base layer. Where is the thing?
Oh, wait, yeah, do that one again. I forget.
Oh, there it is. Yeah, okay. So by default, the base layer should still be visible. Oh yeah, so I don't have to worry about any of that. And
Okay.
of course, we'll test this out and make sure it works. So they'll see failure or success depending on how they did. We have to program that in on the base layer. The triggers show the success layer if results are 100%, otherwise show the failure slide. So still think I don't have that variable set correctly. So let's try this. Okay, so success. Okay, so we want to show the layer success when the timeline starts on this slide. If the results, and this is where it gets a little bit tricky, is that you can't change these built-in variables to match the A1 question bank naming. So we're gonna do score percent, pass percent, score percent. I can't remember which one it is exactly. So if they got a 100%, they're gonna see a success layer. I'm just gonna go ahead and copy and paste that. It's gonna show failure when timeline starts if the, double click to open this, if the score percent is anything less than 100%. So again, I'm making my users get 100% on all the questions to get the square. Otherwise, it's going to go to their opponent. So it's not 100%, so something like 100. Okay, it's going to show that. And either way, they can continue to the game board. Okay, so I think where I screwed up in my instructions is I'm actually going to copy this trigger here. So it shouldn't just be complete. It should be either got it or you didn't. So it's going to be success when timeline starts in this layer, or it's going to be failure when timeline starts in this layer. Yeah, this I'm editing the instructions live. Slide layers success, because when they go back to the game board, I want those squares to change appropriately. Okay, the base layer. Okay, so then depending on what layer is shown, I'm going to delete this one. That variable will change accordingly. So if they didn't get it, failure. If they did get it, success. Then when they click continue to the game board will have another variable, which will set up right now, which will change the state of A1 depending on what A1 is now equal to. So I'm going to do change state of A1 to, this is again where the naming is important. Correct is going to equal success. I should have mapped this out in advance. To correct when timeline starts in A1, if A1 equals success, I'm going to copy that, paste it, change A1 to incorrect if the value equals failure. Okay. Back to the game board. Oh, and then I need to add one more condition. I don't want my users to be able to try the square again. So that's going to be a game designer's choice. If you want the users to be able to try the square again, I want it to be able to, the users can only do the square if they haven't done it already. So now I need to actually connect that question bank to this square. So I'm going to add another trigger. It's going to be jump to slide, draw from question bank A1. When the user clicks on A1, if A1 is still at normal state, equals, oops, and objects, if the state of A1 equals normal. So the idea is when the game board loads, squares that have not been visited are still set to normal. That's a default state. So only if the state of the square is normal, which means the user hasn't visited, they can click on it, answer the questions, and when it comes back, it's going to change to the appropriate state depending on whether or not they got the questions correct. Okay. You know, while I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and change these state names to well, let me change these. I can't remember if it'll let me change. No, it won't let me change names. I'm not going to change state names because it won't let me. All right. Anyways, again, get your ducks sorted in a row and decide how you're going to name things. Is it going to be success? Is it going to be correct? You know, don't screw yourself up. All right. So this is our one square. I'm going to go ahead and now test this project. Preview, test it, see if it works. So preview the entire project. Take a sip of water. All right, here we go. You can see all the other default stuff is still in place, but the menu appears by default in this theme, which can actually make it kind of handy if you do get trapped somewhere. All right, so if I click on the square, it takes me to the question bank. The correct answer is true. I'm going to select true. It says I got it correct. It takes me to the results slide, which shows me the you got it layer. I'm going to click continue. And nothing happened here because I did not yet program the triggers to show the appropriate state. So that would be important. I did. Wait a minute. I did. Change state. Okay, so this is where I'm actually goofing up here. So change and start. Oh, okay. This should be on not on A1, but on this slide. This is where it gets really tricky because Storyline allows you to really customize your triggers. I want my triggers to make the states change when the timeline starts on the entire slide, so that's really seamless for the user. So let's try that again. All right, another preview. All right, correct answer is true. Okay, I got it. There we go. All right, back to the game board. That worked. Let's go ahead and replay the entire project. This time I'm going to try getting the answer wrong. Submit. Continue. Not quite. All right, there you go. There's the game board. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Nancy, for the little woo. That's live debugging right there. All right. It works the way I expect it to. Yes. I wish when I set up the original states, I had been really consistent in whether, I was going with correct, incorrect, success, failure, whatever, but it works. All right. So as I mentioned, in my Dropbox folder, I've got this original version I built out of tic-tac-toe, and it's extremely complicated, but this is about as simple as I could make it for purposes of this demo. So what you do now is you tested it, it's working correctly. Oh, no, what you actually probably do now is you probably want to do like a save as, or at least a save to make sure that nothing is going to happen to this project. You do a save as, and this remains in its pristine state. So as you start copying and pasting and duplicating, you can always refer back to this, which makes it kind of like an easy thing to look at. So what you do now is you copy and paste this basically 8 times. You're going to create 8 more variables, 1 for each of the remaining 8 squares. Going to create 8 more question banks. I recommend put each into its own scene, labeling the scene accordingly, creating the result slide. You have to do that whole thing. You could do a copy and paste of the scene itself, I believe. Can you? Yeah, you can duplicate the scenes. So let's see if we do that. That might be a little bit too complicated because then it doesn't actually create a new question bank. So you'd have to I don't know, do that whole thing again. So that might not be the best way to do it, but I'm sure you can figure out your own oh, what am I trying to say? Your own workflow that makes sense for you. And then you'd also have to, once you build all that out, duplicate A1's state triggers. You need a trigger on the main game board for correct and incorrect, depending on whether you had success or failure for the results slide. So 7:45, I think I'm gonna stop there. I don't want to belabor it. If you can build out the one square, you can build out the other 8. It's just a little bit tedious. Oh, remember, do lots of save as's and do lots of testing. Something else I wanted to mention was the success and failure layers for when you actually get 3 in a row. Let me show you how you built that out.
Okay.
I'm not going to show you how I built it out exactly, at least by doing a step-by-step, but I'll show you how I have it built out in the original version, because this is
Okay.
you know, of course, surprisingly complicated.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So you'll see down here in my slide layers, again, this is probably why I did very careful labeling in my original project of, you know, A, B, C, rows, 1, 2, 3 columns. Because down here, you have to build out the success and failure paradigms, basically, whether the computer gets 3 in a row or the user gets 3 in a row. So how many was it when I counted yesterday? How many layers was it? 16 layers. It's 16 layers in total for each possibility of whether you win or whether you lose, horizontal, vertically, and diagonally 3 in a row. So that's the example in the fully built file, because it's kind of complicated.
Oh, it is, yeah.
Yeah, so I just made a cute
very neat.
Huh?
It's very neat though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so again, I used the labeling came into play here. So I put lose C1 diagonal, you lose the 3s, you win the 3s, and you can see, again, there's a lot of copying and pasting here. It's nothing super fancy. It just matters that you are a very organized person in making sure your triggers are set up appropriately. So those will show up. And of course, oh, and there's also a draw paradigm as well, because in tic-tac-toe can happen that you can end up with the draw. So for example, you would show the layer win A1 through A3, which is the top row here. And I set this to when the timeline reaches time 3 seconds, so that the game board will load, and then like it kind of takes a second and then it appears. You know, it's like a style choice. If A1 equals correct and A2 equals correct and A3 equals correct. So if those 3 variables all equal correct, then the game knows, oh, I need to show this layer because that's actually the end of the game. So these triggers appear after, so you need to have all the states change kind of in advance so that the user can see whether they got the exit or the O on the game board. And then I have all of the triggers that show the win and loss layers depending on if they have 3 X's or if there's 3 O's on screen. It'll show the win or loss layer down below. Okay. I think that's the worst of it. Again, it's a lot of copying and pasting. It looks like a lot. It's not as bad as it looks. It just really matters that you are very detail oriented. And I made things more complicated in this version, like I mentioned in my demo. I have a light box that appears that shows a reference tool for you to actually be able to use, you know, an external reference to help you answer the questions. I added in a rule slide. I made a very complicated reset button. You don't need to do these things necessarily. You just need to build out the tic-tac-toe squares and then build out the question banks, all that other respective stuff. And so again, everything in here is also just shapes. There's nothing really fancy about my graphic design here. If I move this, yeah, so this is actually just a, you know, shape in the background there that adds a nice little cross hatch.
I was wondering how you made that.
It's all a hack, Nancy. Everything I do is a giant hack. Yeah, so that is the long and the short of it. Let's see where I am on the instructions here. Yeah, keep saving as, keep testing, add any additional content. That's basically it. Keep yourself really organized, do a lot of copying and pasting, and that'll take you to where you want to be. So where did I see here? All right, so just to be really tidy and wrap up my project here. Wrap up. Practice files and resources are available at tinyurl.com/tic-tac-toe-storyline. And that brings me to the end of this webinar. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording. Thank you to those of you that are watching the recording, and I hope you enjoyed this webinar.